sustenance or nourishment. There's a lot of spiritual magazines that have had bread in the title. Probably bread has been the title of hundreds of books. I remember growing up, my mom used to read this little magazine. It was a monthly magazine. It was the same size as Our Creative Thought, and it was called Our Daily Bread. And I remember really well, running around, getting ready for school in the morning, and she would be somewhere, maybe at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Our Daily Bread and her Bible, and she read it each day. That sustenance, that nourishment. Charles Fillmore, who is one of our New Thought ancestors, said, metaphysically, bread is the universal substance, the bounty of God, the generosity of the law, and it truly feeds and refreshes. A couple of weeks ago, Skyway House, that is an organization that is for drug and alcohol rehabilitation and recovery, in Chico, opened a house called Serenity, which is interesting. And Serenity is this gorgeous house that is, if you're going up Cohasset, you go up Cohasset beyond the airport, kind of just beyond Richardson Springs, you turn off and you go up, and it's a 3,000 square foot plus house. It's huge. It's 2-story. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's just as you begin to go up into just the foothills, and there is that volcanic and oak kind of rugged, beautiful landscape up there. And Serenity House, Serenity, sits on 40 acres up there, and it has a view of the valley, and especially when it gets dark, of Chico, that is just beautiful. It's breathtaking. So they had a ribbon cutting because this is a new endeavor, and I was there, and it started at 4:30 in the afternoon, and I walked in, and the first thing that I had to do is very important. They had laid out plates of cookies throughout the house, and so I had to grab my chocolate chip cookie. I had to do that, So I'm walking around, and it's kind of like, if you're at a cocktail party, only you've got a cookie. You don't have a cocktail, because it is recovery, by the way. So anyway, so we had our cookie, and we're talking. And this house, one of the things, among many things that's so beautiful about it, is it's so full of glass. It's just full of windows. And the back of the house looks sort of at Chico, but also to the west a bit. It's turned that way. So I show up at 4:30. And so people are beginning to, a lot of dignitaries, political people, town people, medical people, recovery people, religious people, real estate people, chamber of commerce people, all kinds of people showed up. So you're milling around, you're talking, you're introducing yourself. And suddenly, about 4:45 or close to 5 o'clock, there was this phenomenon that would just sort of begin to unfold. And that particular day was a gorgeous day, like we've had so much lately. And there were some clouds, a few clouds over Chico and a few clouds kind of in the coast range. And as the sun went down, they kind of took on this deep gray. And then suddenly there was just a hint of pink, almost like peach. Came up, and as people were walking around, it kind of, because of all these windows, we kind of became aware of that. And as the sun continued to drop, that peach, that light pink, got more and more intense and was moving into a fuchsia against this dark gray. And the lights of Chico, as the darkness began to kind of come up. And it was interesting, you would see people like standing inside talking, yes, my name is so-and-so, and isn't this a wonderful place? And suddenly those conversations began to just kind of tail off, and people began to go to this really big back porch. And people just began to turn towards that. And all of a sudden, all the cell phones came out, and people were shooting pictures of it. And the darker it got, the more that the sun moved to the west, it just got more and more and more gorgeous. It was like it could not possibly become more gorgeous, and in the next moment it would. And pretty soon, the cell phones went down and kind of back into pockets, and people just kind of stood there, and you could hear these conversations where you could tell nobody was listening to each other, just staring at the sky. And I stood there with my cookie with one bite out of it, and I just watched. And as the sun continued to move to the west, and then that amazing explosion of fuchsia began to wane and move its way back into peach and to faintness, I heard someone say, wow, that was like, that was just like for us, serenity. And it's really true. I mean, it's this idea of opening up to something, and everybody on the back porch with their cookie and their cell phone, basically, that what happened there was something that touched a deep place. A deep place. That is absolutely and completely nourishing to the soul. Ernest Holmes says, when he weighs in on the idea of bread, he advises us to not look for things that are fulfilling in the wrong places. Holmes basically says, we get ourselves in trouble when we look for fulfillment in the wrong places. And so, what was it that enabled those of us on the back porch to be nourished by that? It was an openness to it. And what Holmes says, to look for fulfillment in the wrong places. And I remember, a teacher that I have a great deal of respect for was Dr. Carolyn McEwen, who founded the Center for Spiritual Living in Chico, and she actually started in this center, and then she went to Chico a long time ago. And I remember a talk she gave one Sunday where she said, Spirit is always there. Spirit doesn't turn its back on us. It's us who turn our back on Spirit. And I thought, wow, what if for some reason I had chosen to turn my back on that sunset? I mean, listen to the song that you just sang. And the thing about Louis Armstrong was Louis Armstrong truly saw the world that way. And Louis Armstrong, I don't know if you are aware of this, but he was really criticized by some fellow performers who were African American at the time because they thought that he was too optimistic, that he was too happy, that he got along too well, because he should be outraged at what was going on in America around race. And I think Louis Armstrong knew that as well as anyone. He grew up in the South. But those words you sang today were truly his words. And what are they? It's about opening up to the nourishment of Spirit. Opening up to what is in this world that is absolutely, completely gorgeous, that nourishes us. That speaks to that place inside, to where you stand and you are just, you don't talk, you don't discuss, you just take it in. I had a conversation with my daughter recently, and my daughter and I have been in real close communication for a while because she's coming out here, and I'm going to see her this week. And she lives in the Houston area, and she's coming out, and she just had a baby a while back, and so this is a really big deal. And she and her husband both have family in California, and his family's in San Diego, her family's up here, so they're doing this whole thing. We've been texting and communicating more than we normally do. And I knew that my daughter was her husband's family, and her husband sort of had Christian tendencies. And I knew this. And so, but I've been in communicating with my daughter, and my daughter is a big Facebooker, and she's a big texter, and she's chatty like me, and she just, any way to communicate, and God, get her on the phone. You will never get off. And I was noticing in some of her communication, I was noticing a little bit more of what I suspected was a deeper relationship in what she was doing religiously. So I was talking to her on the phone the other day, and a week or so ago, and a little over a week ago, and she said she was talking, and she said something that kind of opened the door to it. And so I asked her, I said, my daughter's name is Jessie. I said, Jessie, it seems to me that you're a little more religiously committed than you used to be. Is that true? And she said, yeah, I am. So I said, well, so I asked her the question. I said, well, what are you finding there? And she said, I'm finding fulfillment. And I said, well, tell me about that. And she talked about a relationship with Jesus, and she talked about community. And so we went on, and I said, well, that's great. I said, when you mean fulfillment, what do you mean? And she said, Dad, she said, I didn't realize that I had an empty place in me until I filled it. And she talked about the fact that she had been baptized, and for those of you who are Catholics and not Protestants, baptism in the Protestant world is big as an adult. It's, and I said, what did that mean to you? And she said, well, it was my public statement. It was my public acknowledgement. It was my witness. It was my stepping into community. These people who mean so much to me. And you see, it's interesting what you ask Spirit for, because you might get your request answered. And that is, a long time ago, I said to myself, I don't care what my kids go into religiously. I just want them to find a spiritual practice. Now, why did I say that? Because of what Holmes is saying. Looking for Spirit in all the wrong places. Looking for fulfillment. And I didn't need Ernest Holmes to tell me that, by the way, because I am an expert at looking in the wrong places for fulfillment. And I know that when we do that as human beings, not only do we not get fulfilled, but we leave very often emptier than when we started. And I look at this world, and I look at those ways that people are looking for fulfillment in what I would call empty calories. The medical world and the nutrition world today tell us about empty calories. And they say what's wrong with us as people very often is our empty calories. That's why we are not feeling good, and maybe we're not the weight we want to be. And I thought about that. I've thought about that in terms of metaphorically the connection between what we look for fulfillment in the wrong places, all those empty calories, and how we end up in a place that we don't even want to start out at. So I got my wish, I got my desire, and I have a daughter who's involved in a spiritual practice, and she is feeling fulfilled, and she is feeling honored. And so when I had a conversation with her, I chose to show up in that conversation having our conversation about nourishment. And not about, what do you think God is? And how about duality? And how about unity? And how about this? And how about that? And how about all the, the piles of books I have in my office that parses and separates and defines and looks at all of the ways that people have been religious, and to simply go to a place of let's talk about nourishment. The closest we came was she said, Dad, do you guys practice baptism? And I said, no, we don't. And she asked why, and I said, because we don't believe in the salvation doctrine. And that was the closest we came. And then we moved back into the nourishment part of it. And she talked about how it was so nice that she was now finding some guidance by which to raise her children in a way that's not just purely materialistic. And her children were involved in a charity that their church was involved in, and so during the holidays they were very much involved in giving as well as receiving, and the meaning of that. And then as synchronicity would have it, last week I was involved in a spiritual workshop, and at one point during the spiritual workshop, the people who were leading it broke us into groups. Where we were with, say there were 4 or 5 of us together in a small group. And the workshop, just to put it quickly, was more like, it's something like, we're looking at those areas of our life that are challenging, and then it's about the transformation and transition of that and the healing of that. And when I was in a group, I was with 4 or 5 other people, 4 people, and one of the things that, this person sitting across from me looks me right in the eye and says, "Andy, what is it that nourishes you?" Now, I just had a conversation with my daughter a half a week before, and suddenly Andy's in the spotlight. What is it that nourishes you? And I froze. And in that instant, I realized that it's really simple to get into what I would call a religious technician. To talk about how we get and how we heal and what it means and what the differences are and what we believe and what they believe and why we don't believe and intention and all this kind of stuff, instead of a simple question, "Andy, what is it that nourishes you?" And for a moment I froze. And I found myself to be in a really uncomfortable place, and I thought, oh my God. You just had this conversation with your daughter. Your daughter, my daughter doesn't care about comparative religion. She doesn't care about the differences between things. She doesn't care. She probably never even thought of duality versus unity. She doesn't think about the difference between God as a person or God as energy. She doesn't care. She doesn't care about that. She simply is in a place of, I want to be fulfilled. I want to have a connection to something that nourishes me, that opens me up to the bread of life, as Fillmore would say, the substance of life. And I in that moment, I really began to reflect upon the other way. We get our nourishment from sunsets, and we get it from lakes high in the mountains, and we get it from seashores, and we get it from beautiful skies, and we get it from holding hands with someone we really love. But the other place that we get it from the spiritual mystics and masters that we tend to follow. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, "Jesus is awesome." And I thought about that for a moment. 2,000 years ago was this Jesus idea, and somewhere along the line, 2,000 years later, there is a person within a car who is so touched by that sensibility that they went out and spent good money on a bumper sticker and put it on the back of their Camry. Okay? Why? What did Jesus teach? Jesus was not a religious mechanic. Jesus was not a religious technician. Jesus was just a guy who, go find the New Testament. Go get yourself a red letter edition. You can read everything the guy said in 20 minutes. It's very simple. It was about love. It was about connection. It was about fulfillment. It was about forgiveness. It was about how do we show up better. I remember seeing a bumper sticker a couple years ago that said, "How would Buddha drive?" And there again, Buddha, whenever Buddha was walking around, you go look down through the years, and somebody is so touched by the Buddhist sensibility that they went out, spent good money for a bumper sticker, and put it on the back of their Chevy Chevette. Okay? And so what did Buddha teach? Buddha taught connection and love and forgiveness and opening up to spirit. Very simple kinds of things. Ernest Holmes in his work makes a very clear distinction about who he calls the mystics. And the mystics, according to Holmes, were not the religious technicians. They were people who simply stepped into life and talked about what it was to feel fulfilled. What it was to love and forgive and to be and to make the world a better place one person at a time. And these sensibilities come down to us. I don't think Ernest Holmes considered himself a mystic, because I think Holmes knew he was kind of a religious technician. I mean, that's up to other people to figure out. But I think the point is that Holmes had a great reverence for the mystics, the real mystics. And he basically says to us that we have the capacity to be a mystic when we can begin to open up to spirit and to move away from what I would call the religious technician thing that we do. So I asked myself a question last week when I had someone say to me, Andy, what is it that nourishes you? And I had this realization that, maybe I'm becoming a little bit of a religious technician. So I asked myself a question. I said, okay, Andy, why is it that you're not allowing yourself to simply open up to be nourished? I mean, the question wasn't, Andy, how do you nourish people? It was, how are you nourished? And I had to come to the realization that to be nourished, we simply have to open up. I mean, you ever watch the sunflowers in the valley? They just open up and turn to the sun. That's it. That's all they do. Am I willing to simply open up to the love and the wisdom and the fulfillment of the teachers that I have turned to? And I asked myself a really difficult question. I said, how did this happen? And what I realized was I went back to Emerson about, get your bloated nothingness out of the way. And what I realized what Emerson was trying to say is that, your ego is a little bit out of control. Because maybe you're trying to deal with self-esteem issues and you want to be able to walk around and talk about all the differences of religion and all the prophecies and all that other stuff and all the mythologies and all the separations, as opposed to just simply being willing to open up and to be nourished. To simply open up and be nourished. The other day when I saw the bumper sticker, Jesus is awesome, I thought immediately about the times that I have stepped into a conversation where someone will come and talk to me about Jesus, and I'll say, well, theologians, some theologians don't even know if he really existed. Well, see, that's an ego place. Who cares? Look at the people that his ideas or the Jesus ideas have touched, the Buddha ideas have touched. Who cares? Getting into that debate is being in the religious technician thing. And why can't I just simply open up to what this incredible master had to share? Okay. So I'm going to invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes. And I'm just going to ask you for a moment just to sit in just a bit of silence, just for a moment, with your eyes closed. This morning I would ask you to imagine, just for a moment, what spiritual nourishment looks like to you. What is your spiritual bread? Doesn't matter how that shows up, just be there. Now I want to ask you to allow yourself to see whatever spiritual mystic or master means the most to you, whoever that is. Whoever that is, and however you see them. Now I want you to imagine what they are trying to share with you. What they are trying to share with you. Now I want you to imagine becoming that master. Becoming that particular master. Allow yourself to embody that person. That spiritual master. That great mystic. I want you to imagine the road they traveled to gain the realizations that they have. Now I'd like you to imagine what is it that you are trying to tell you. What are you trying to show you? Now I want you to bring up into consciousness why that has not been easy for you to hear or to open up to. I'd like to invite you to bring your consciousness back into the room. and to find those words.
How could anyone ever tell you were anything less than you knew? How could anyone ever tell you were less than all? How could anyone fail to notice that your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected